I would actually agree with you on that.
Let me just give Patrick a chance, and you know, and I know inviting you to speculate on somebody else's state of mind is perhaps a little frivolous to a certain extent, but you know, you have spoken to a lot of the Syrian leadership over the years, and it is slightly instructive to try and understand whether they believe they have the right to rule, or whether they believe that what they are doing is in the good of the people. I mean, how do you read this psychological situation?
Well, I think his mind has been shaped by the sort of crises Syria has faced over the last decade, and even longer than a decade, but certainly in his decade. You see, he came to power very shortly after 9/11. He faced George Bush's global war on terror. Then he faced the invasion of Iraq, and he knew very well that had the Americans succeeded in Iraq, Syria would have been the next target of the pro-Israeli neoconservatives. He then faced a crisis in Lebanon in 2005 with the assassination of Rafik Hariri, and he felt that George Bush and Jacques Chirac, at the time the French president, wanted to overthrow him. Then he faced Israel's attack on Lebanon in 2006, its attack on Gaza in 2008 and 2009. Now, from his point of view, all these were regime-threatening crises, and he tends to interpret the present internal uprising as yet another external conspiracy against him and against the stance, the nationalist stance which he thinks he has pursued, which he inherited from his father, against American pressure, against Israel, against the Western powers. Hence his alliance with Iran and with Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Which essentially echoes some of the points that Ammar was making. So let's pick up this theme and question whether there may be some merit in his fears. But before I do that, let me just play one more soundbite from the president himself and question whether his framing of the situation, even if he does believe what he says, is actually reasonable. Earlier this month, President Bashar al-Assad, he did say that the nation is passing through turmoil. He said he's not in control of the brutality of the crackdown against the people, and he raised some doubts in doing so about his own control. But let me just play you this small part of the interview here.
Do you feel guilty?
I did my best to protect the people, so you cannot feel guilty when you do your best. You feel sorry for the life that has been lost, but you don't feel guilty when you don't kill people. They are not my forces. They are military forces, belong to the government. Okay, I don't own them. I'm president.
Ammar, let me bring it back to you, just for the sake of argument. I mean, even if he has good reason to think that there are foreign forces, elements, influences that are determining this, and he is the target of some kind of conspiracy. Is there not a little bit of disingenuousness in that interview that he gave to the US TV stations? I mean, international organizations are talking about 5,000 people killed, and he is talking about no leader would kill his own people, as if he had absolutely no clue this was going on.
Well, first of all, I need to comment on the conduct of ABC. They took certain parts of the interview, and I would advise anyone who is interested in the Syrian situation to go and see the interview in full. It's on their website, and it was only made available to the international world like a few days after this short video was released. Anyway, I think he's in a sense, control of the situation. I think what he was trying to say is that the army, the security forces, are only institutions that, yes, I command, but they are institutions with set objectives, and they, you know, have to carry out those objectives, i.e. to protect the civil status of the society and protect the people. Now, with regards to the number of the dead, now what we have also been falling victim of in Syria is that people are reporting the number of dead as only civilians. So they say now that there have been like 5,000 civilians. Nobody says anything about a large proportion of those people being A, military servicemen and intelligence servicemen on the ground, and B, loyal supporters to the regime who were also civilians and who were slaughtered by some armed groups. The issue is as well here is that because the government isn't allowing the international, say, Red Cross or Human Rights Watch or whatever to go into the country, these certain groups have fallen victim to people who have, you know, one thing to say. They cannot interview other people who have another thing to say, which rendered their reports really, not very useful in this case.
Well,
I don't know again why the government isn't allowing them in. Again, perhaps this is a defensive measure for not allowing things to go worse.
Yeah, all right.
But basically this is what we are into. Yeah.
Maybe one day we'll get an answer to that question. Samir Aita, let me ask you to comment on what Patrick Seal said a few moments ago, the timeline of events around the Middle East that might prompt any leader in that region to feel vulnerable. There is an enormous history, even much more than what Patrick just said, of evidence that suggests that people like Bashar al-Assad and countries like Syria are in the firing line of the Western powers, of the UN-led organizations. And he has absolutely every reason to fear that this is not a domestic uprising, but an internationally orchestrated one. Would you not agree with that?
Of course, especially in the case of Syria, but also in Tunisia and in Egypt, there is always the two dimensions of any event, which means the genuine internal thing, which is that the people could no more admit to be only subjects to their leaders, whatever are their leaders, and the geostrategic game that there is the US, the Western guys, the military bases in the whole region, and that the US want the whole Middle East, rich of oil, to be its region, completely controlled directly or by some regional or other forces. So, but the important thing for a leader is where he places himself. Means the Syrian people is nationalistic and patriotic, not Bashar al-Assad. He made deals. He's only a leader. He places himself only as a player in the international arena, while his major role is to be responsible to his own people. What did you do for the struggle against Israel, or getting a peace process, or doing things for your own people, both on the economic, on the social, on the political level. He speaks to the Syrians like if the Syrians are subject. In other situations, like in 2006 or in 2003, the things that Patrick Shield talked about, people defended him, didn't want the regime change, while in 2006 there was a lot of powers who wanted at this time the regime change. But this time it went too much, which means the people don't believe him anymore.
All right.
He's not reliable. He didn't do anything before the events to the things, and the spring, the Arab Spring, is for every country, which means it will go to Syria, it will go to Saudi Arabia, it will all go to all other regions in the Middle East, maybe away. This is an awakening of a population, of the civil society.
Maybe we'll do a show on that as well in the coming weeks. But let me just finish off this particular program by asking all three of you, and we'll continue with you, Samir. What do you think this is going to play out as? I mean, does Bashar al-Assad have the capacity to maintain his hold on power or not?
What will happen, I hope, is that the regional power, and especially the Arab countries, will stick solid on their initiative. This initiative means that to take back the uprising to its peaceful meanings, to get the people into their Tahrir Abbasiyya or Umayyads square, and to make the change like how the people want to do it. And these people are patriotic maybe 10 times more than Bashar al-Assad.
Okay, very quickly, Ammar, your thoughts on how this is going to play out?
I think it should be obvious for a lot of people now that the government isn't going anywhere. It should be also obvious that the street cannot go back to the pre-March 15th status. So what I see next is a sort of Nash equilibrium where the people and the government should need to come together into a middle solution. Perhaps the national opposition could play a part in this, because what we have now is that three divisions of the people. You have the die-hard supporters, the die-hard opposers, and the people in between. And the people in between will not like the extremist voice. So it is, I think, a fair play for the national opposition to put their hands into the hands of the government and lead the country out of this. I think that's the best solution.
The last word to you.
The killing has to stop. I mean, there is no military solution to the problem. And the problem today is that the regime still thinks it can win by brute force. I don't think it can. The only alternative is a dialogue leading to a peaceful transition. Now, it may be necessary for external powers to intervene here. The Russians are trying with this latest resolution of the UN. The Iraqis have sent a delegation. The Arab League is trying. I think people understand now that if this killing isn't stopped, the thirst for revenge will be very great, and the country will then descend into the hell of a civil war.
All right, Patrick Seal in London, thank you. Thank you also Ammar Wakaf, also in London, and Samir Aita in Paris. Thank you all for joining us today. And that wraps up this first programme in this new series, a fairly broad brush look at the events that are going on inside Syria. Next week and in the weeks to follow, we'll be focusing in a little bit more closely on those events and on the developments in the country. Until then, bye-bye.